turn it over to Suzanne.
Thank you, Charlie. Good evening, all, and welcome to the 4th of 9 workshops in our Sustainable Landscape series. My name is Suzanne Barclay, and I'm the Executive Director at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Rockland. Tonight, we're pleased to welcome Donna D'Souza to explain the link between soils, water conservation, and healthy plants. Since you've joined us tonight, you're likely aware that water conservation is a serious issue in Rockland. And that's because our drinking water supply essentially comes from the rain that falls within our borders and makes its way into our aquifers and reservoirs. USGS hydrologist Paul Heisig published an analysis in 2010 that determined that our problem in Rockland is that we use the most water at the worst possible time. So our peak water usage occurs during the driest months in the summer when there's the most evaporation from our reservoirs, the least rainfall, and our highest usage. We're watering our lawns and garden, washing cars, filling swimming pools, things like that. The good news is that conserving water in our county is a manageable problem. One of the few environmental problems where we can each individually actually make a real and measurable difference. You can't say that about a lot of environmental issues, but water conservation is not difficult, it's not particularly painful, and it saves you money. Hence our series focus on our outdoor water use and conservation. All of these workshops are designed to give you specific steps to take to reduce water use in your yard. Our August workshop will focus on stormwater management at home, and then in September, we'll address integrated pest management and water conservation, and we'll alert you to these upcoming workshops. So just a few housekeeping issues. Charlie explained that you can ask questions in the Q&A, and we'll address them at the end. And then after the Q&A, there'll be a brief survey to get your feedback, and that survey will pop up on your screen at the end. We'll try to end at 8 p.m. So if your question wasn't answered or if you have any feedback at all for us, please email us at rockland@cornell.edu. And finally, I want to thank our funders, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the Hudson River Estuary Program, and the New York State Water Resources Institute. Also, our communications manager, Charlie Payne, is the person behind the scenes managing the technology. When we design a series like Sustainable Landscapes, we cast a broad net when we look for speakers. But for this one, the expertise was local. Donna D'Souza has been a Master Gardener volunteer here in Rockland since 2005. Donna oversees our demonstration gardens here at Extension, as well as our vegetable varietal trials, which she then reports the results to Cornell University. She assists in our Master Gardener training every 2 years and is a regular contributor to our Speakers Bureau. She presents on a variety of topics, including edible landscaping, annuals and perennials, putting the garden to bed, and more. Donna, the screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I'm going to do a really quick recap for those of you who may or may not have been along from the beginning. But we started this Sustainable Landscapes program with a great talk by Margie Turin, who's a Lamont Doherty Observatory education coordinator. And she talked about Rockland County's water conservation plans. And for those of you who happen to not be in Rockland County, everything we're going to say tonight is very useful for any garden anywhere. After that, Frank Rossi, who is professor of turfgrass science at Cornell, gave a really terrific talk about lawn management and water use with a lot of comedy also. I'm not going to be as funny as him. And then the last talk we had was by Dr. Nina Bassick, who's also a professor at Cornell of urban horticulture. And she talked about water-wise plantings for mainly woody perennials, trees and shrubs. What I'm going to talk about tonight is more local in your yard small plantings, your vegetables, your flowering ornamentals, not your big trees and shrubs as much. And I'm going to break it down into a little tiny bit of botany about what actually is soil, what's it made up of, and then how does soil and water, most importantly, help plants live. And then we're going to go into more practical stuff of how do you keep your soil optimal and help keeping the plants happy, and at the same time, keeping your water use efficient. So what does soil do for plants? Mainly, it provides for most plants physical support, except for those plants that live up in trees. Plants need the soil to support themselves. That's where their roots anchor themselves to the earth. It also provides essential minerals for the plant to survive. The soil provides most of a plant's water. That water comes in through the roots, not as much through the leaves or stems, mainly through the roots. And it does provide some of its oxygen. Okay, now we're going to look at what is soil exactly. And it's made up ideally of the ratio of water, air, mineral components, and organic matter. This diagram I have here is an ideal soil. It would be very lovely if 50% of the soil was divided between water and air, and 5% about was organic matter, and the rest was the mineral components. But not all soils are quite like this, but this would be something that we'd strive for. Now I'm going to go through each of these 4 components of soil, describe what they are, and then show how they work together to bring water to plants and nutrients. So when I first started looking into soils, I was always told that they're made up of 3 sizes. We're not talking about the makeup of the soil, but the sizes. And sand is the biggest shape. It is rounded, and you can see it by eye. Silt is the medium size that you find minerals in, and you need a microscope to see that. And clay is the very, very smallest, and they're very flat and plate-like, and you need an electron microscope to see them. And where do all these mineral particles come from? They come from the rock that's the earth is made up of, and the rock is broken down by ice and water and wind, and as it's broken down, it becomes these little mineral fragments that make up the basis 25% of the soil. What it's important for is this is the source of the plant nutrients. If you look down in the blue box below, these are all the nutrients that are found in the mineral particles of soil broken down from rock. All the nutrients are essential, but they're needed in different amounts. As you can see, I have primary nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are needed in the highest amount, next to calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Then the micronutrients are only needed in trace amounts, but they are necessary. So a healthy soil should have all of these components and the right amounts for the soil. For the plant. The second component of a soil, and it's really only about 5%, but it is really critical, is the organic matter. And this is both once living organisms and things and currently living organisms. So if you see in figure 1 there, that's some plant material that's breaking down. So organic matter is the bodies of plants, insects, fungi, animals, their excretions, etc., that are in various stages of decomposing. But living organisms are also a really important part of soil, and they include the plant roots and the soil organisms such as earthworms, insects, live fungi, live bacteria. We'll discuss in a little bit why those are very important. So this is where we're going to discuss it. So if you look at the organic matter, it starts out as fresh organic residue, something that just died. This is somebody's compost pile, and this is a good idea. In figure 1, this is a good example of fresh organic residue. What happens is the soil microorganisms, the worms, the beetles, the bacteria, the fungi start to break down that organic residue into what's called active organic matter. And as that process of breaking down occurs, the mineral nutrients from the mineral particles of the soil are released for the plants to take up. And as this process of decomposition goes on, you hit an endpoint, and that's what we call that humus, and it also called stable organic matter. That's also really important too, because it helps hold the mineral particles together, which will, I'll show you down the road, helps to hold water and oxygen for the plants. And it also holds some of the nutrients for the plant's use. Now, water, the next component, about 25% of a good soil would be water. And most water, as I said, used by plants is absorbed through the roots. The nutrients that are in the soil, those mineral, the calcium, the phosphorus that I discussed, those enter the roots dissolved in the water. And water is also used in photosynthesis, which is that process that plants do amazingly, that we don't do, which is it takes sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, and it makes food, carbohydrates, and then gives off oxygen as a byproduct. And those carbohydrates are also called sugars, like glucose is what the primary one is made, and sometimes they go on and make sucrose and other types of fructose, other types of carbohydrates. Within those carbohydrate structures, energy is actually stored later on for use by the plant for its regular life processes. The other thing that water is important for is it moves nutrients from the soil and food that's created by photosynthesis throughout the plant, from the roots to the leaves to the stems, various parts of the plant, back down to the roots, the carbohydrates. So moving food and nutrients around is totally reliant on water. The other thing that water helps plants do is to stay rigid. If a plant is wilting, as you can see in figure 1 on the left side, that's because the cells of the plant don't have enough water in them, but as cells hydrate and puff out, then the plant has rigidity and stays upright. And water also helps cool the plant, much like the way we sweat. There are little pores on mainly the undersides of leaves that are called stomata. And you can see in figure 3, that's actually a little microscope view of a stomata. Let me see if I can get my pointer. Yeah, these little round circles here. And water is released through these little stomata, and it evaporates into the air, and that cools the plant down, much like sweating cools us down. So on a really hot day or in a very hot environment, transpiration or water release and evaporation is used to cool the plant down. And water is required for seeds, for germination. A lot of seeds coats are covered with a particular chemical that inhibits germination until like the right time. Usually, the spring, you don't want the seed germinating in the middle of the winter. And the timing is such that the seed knows to open up when the germination inhibiting chemicals are washed away in the spring rains. So that's really important there. And then those soil organisms that live and break down organic matter, the bacteria, the beetles, the worms, they need water in the soil for their life processes. And the last but not least is air is an important component of soils. Both plants and the soil organisms do need oxygen to live and grow. And in plants, the process respiration uses oxygen and combines it with that carbohydrate that it made in photosynthesis, and helps break up the bonds of those carbohydrates, those sugars, releasing energy, and then releasing carbon dioxide and a little bit of water as a byproduct. So the oxygen is necessary here. And most oxygen does enter the plants in the leaves through those stomata, those pores I pointed out, where the water vapor also escapes. But for plant roots, which also do have chemical processes, some oxygen does come into the plant roots through the soil for their health, and the soil microorganisms also have this process of respiration, and they need the air from the soil. Okay, now we're going to put all of this together. So we've got mineral particles, which are the broken down pieces of rock due to ice, wind, erosion. And then we have humus, which is the breakdown product of organic matter, dead insects, excretions of animals. And the humus holds the mineral particles together and forms what's called a soil aggregate. And that has structures within it to hold air and water. I'm going to go to the next slide because it's a little clearer. So what happens is you get these soil aggregates that kind of clump loosely together. And in the big pores, you can hold some things, and in the little pores, you can hold some other things, which I will show you in a moment. What happens is the tiny pores hold water molecules, and they also hold a little bit of air for use of the plants. The bigger pores in between the soil aggregates allow water and air to move through your soil and drain out and just help keep the soil healthy. They provide a place for the microbes to live, those bigger pores, and they provide a space for the roots to grow through the soil particles. Now, good soil structure, which is what we hope to have in our gardens, is when you have soil aggregates with a mix of pore sizes, both the micro, the little ones to hold the water in the air, and macro to allow air movement through the soil and good water drainage, because you don't want to end up with a swamp in your yard. You want the water to go through and drain and not be swampy, but enough of these little micropores to hold on to some water that makes it available to the plants. Okay, that's it for the botany part for a while. And now let's say, well, how do you get good soil structure like I just showed you in the previous slide? There's really two really important things you can do. You can add organic matter to your soil on a regular basis, and you can protect your soil from compaction. We'll look at these two activities. Okay. If you're starting a garden, or if you have an existing garden and you're interested in knowing how much organic matter you have in it, you can have a soil analysis done. Here in Rockland, and maybe in other states and in other counties, your cooperative extension can probably do this for you. But in Rockland, you can contact our lab at 845-429-7085, and we will help you get a soil analysis report. It's an outside laboratory in upstate New York that does it. I think it costs about $20 to $25 to do it. You don't do it every year, you just do it periodically. I did this for my vegetable garden in 2011, as you can see, and down here is my organic matter percent. This is 6.9, by the way, not 69. So, you're aiming for about 5%. 6.9 looked good. I was very happy with that. Great. I have good organic matter in my vegetable garden, and I'm not surprised because I put a lot of compost in it every year. So if you are starting a brand new garden, you're taking a field or a part of your lawn or something where you never gardened, you never put anything but turf grass or weeds or whatever before, you want to add organic matter into the top 6 to 12 inches of soil, turn it in. If you have an existing garden where you have a lot of plantings, like this is a little perennial garden here, you're not going to turn over the soil every year to add organic matter in because you'll disturb what you have planted there. So very simply, just mix, if you want, by hand into the top few inches of the soil, the organic matter, or what I do, and this works just fine, is just layer a few inches of compost, organic matter on top, and the soil microorganisms will actually pull that new compost into the soil over the years. I know this works. I'm going to do a little quick aside. I had an addition put on my house, and after it was done, they brought in topsoil for me. And this is a whole other talk show, which really was terrible underlayment soil that was full of nails and junk. So I had really poor soil on a big stretch of my side yard where I wanted a garden, and I did not want to bring in wheelbarrows loads of organic matter to turn into that soil. That's just a lot of work I wasn't ready to do. So what I did is that I put in plants that I knew could live in poor soil. And then I just every year added compost mulch on top of the soil. And now we're out like 15 years. Within about 5 years, I noticed that the soil was definitely improving. Now the soil, this is 15 years out, the soil is great. So it does really incorporate itself in. You can lay it on the top and it will get incorporated in. Okay, now where do you get organic matter? Well, you can go to a store and buy compost. You can get compost from your towns. A lot of municipalities provide compost. You can go to a stable that has big piles of animal manure behind it that has been sitting out for at least a half of the year. You want it to start to break down. A year would be nice because you want to get rid of the urine that's in it. Or you can make your own home compost from, clippings, plant material in your own yard. Now, the next thing we want to worry about is soil compaction. And here's what happens when you have compaction. In a good soil, this is the Goldilocks soil where we've got the micropores and the macropores so that water and air goes through very, very nicely. Everybody's really happy. In compacted soil, the soil aggregates get kind of scrunched together and you lose your macro and micro pores. So air doesn't really get in, and that can cause a lot of problems for the plant roots and for the beneficial soil microorganisms that live down there. They do need that oxygen for their respiration. And water doesn't penetrate. In fact, it will go down just so far and then it'll run off and run away from your soil, which you really don't want. So because we don't want to lose our rainwater or irrigation water, we don't want compacted soil. So how do we avoid that? Well, we want to avoid causes of compaction, which is excessive digging, especially when the soil's wet, weight on the soil, especially when it's wet. You can see here somebody drove you can just see, this is hopefully not somebody's garden, but you can see where in figure 1 where the tractor just compacted the pressure of the weight of that car, just, compacted that soil down. You can see the difference from here to here. This is why we also recommend people not park their cars on their lawns, which people seem to like to do, or not park cars on their lawn underneath trees, because then you're compacting the soil over those tree roots, or not get a pallet of heavy material like lots and lots of bags of mulch or lots and lots of pallets of stoneware. If you're going to do a walk, don't put it on your lawn or your garden or anything. Put it on your driveway or something like that, because you don't want to compact your soil. And rain, hard rain and sleet also do compact. This is obviously some kind of asphalt or something, but you can see how hard that rain is hitting. That will compact your soil. Okay, so what do we do about that? How do we avoid these situations? Let's take a look at don't dig when the soil is wet. Well, how do you know if your soil is wet? Okay, so you can go into your garden, get a handful of soil, squeeze it into a ball like I've done here. And, if it crumbles immediately, it doesn't even hold that form. That's great. That means your soil's not wet and you can work in it. If that ball kind of stays in that shape of your hand, drop it from waist height and let it hit the ground. If it doesn't crumble apart into lots of little pieces, that soil is too wet. If it just stays in that one shape or maybe breaks into 2 pieces, stay out of the ground. Don't walk on it. The soil's too wet to work. Don't start digging in it. Just give yourself a little time. Now, when you first set up a garden, as I said earlier, you really should incorporate in organic matter down to about 6 to 12 inches. And usually when you're starting a garden, you are turning over the soil because you're probably breaking up maybe soil that was compacted. Maybe you're turning over grass or something. And that's okay, as I show in figure 1. However, after you've got that soil turned over and the organic matter incorporated, the current thinking is for no further tilling. I know people like to go out to their vegetable gardens every year and turn over their vegetable gardens, but it actually is not the best practice, because when you till and turn over soil, you are disrupting those soil aggregate soil structures like I showed you in those diagrams, and you can actually cause compaction by your tilling. There are some times where you may want to turn your garden over, a vegetable garden. Sometimes if you're having a lot of trouble with certain pest insects, they may say turn your garden over because they overwinter in your soil. It's kind of a different story, and maybe you do have to do it. But honestly, if you can try not tilling your soil and doing that turnover every year, your soil will be very healthy. I gave up tilling 20 years ago, and my vegetable garden soil was terrific. The other thing you're going to notice is that you're not going to have as many weeds. Your weeds growing in your garden is going to go down dramatically, because when you till, you turn up lots of buried weed seeds, millions of them that are just waiting for sunshine and a chance to grow. So another reason to give up tilling. And then just like I showed earlier, just add compost on top of the soil every year and let it get worked down. Okay, another thing to keep your soil from getting compacted is not to step on your beds, obviously. And you have to think about this. This is my vegetable garden bed. When I first made it, it's 4 feet across. So I can stand on either side and reach to the center without stepping in the bed. When I first made these raised beds, they were 5 feet across. And honestly, to get to the middle to harvest something or plant something, I had to step in the bed. So, you know, I redesigned the bed so I don't have to step in them. I stay in the paths. You don't have to have raised beds. I mean, just make sure that you have, you know, this is the edge of my bed and I am not going to step inside on that. And this soil stays really nice. I can go grow carrots in there. They come out straight because that soil's nice and fluffy. It hasn't been tilled and it hasn't been stepped on. And if you have an existing garden that's maybe not vegetable garden, but like where there's perennials, what this person did is a brilliant idea. They just put some stepping pavers and stepping places in between, you know, just so that they could get in and reach in and do any garden work here and there without actually stepping in the area where the plants are growing. Also, keep the soil mulched all year long. This is going to reduce water loss due to evaporation, because water evaporates out of the soil. It's going to suppress weeds very nicely, and weeds use up a lot of water. It's going to protect your soil from compaction by heavy rain and sleet. That's how you get around this, is by keeping some mulch on top of your soil. And it is going to add organic matter as it decomposes if you start with an organic mulch, which I'm going to talk about right here. Yeah. So in vegetable gardens on the left there, you can use shredded leaves from last fall that have that are dry and crispy. You can use newspaper because the print in newspaper is plant-based, so that's not a problem. You can use compost as your mulch. That's fine too. Compost can be a mulch. You can use straw, but make sure you don't use hay. And the difference is that hay has the seed heads from the grass plant that the hay is cut from. Straw does not have the seed heads. If you put down hay with the seed heads, you're putting a lot of other plant material in your garden, and whatever that hay came from, that's going to grow on you next year. You can use dried grass clippings from your lawn. People who love their lawns are told, and I think Frank Rossi mentioned it, that you want to leave your grass clippings on your lawn because that breaks down and, you know, provides organic matter for your lawn. If you don't care about your lawn, sort of like me, I take my grass clippings, let them dry down, and I use those as my mulch on my garden, my vegetable garden. Make sure your lawn is untreated, though. If you're going to do that, you don't want to put anything from a lawn that's had herbicides or pesticides on it and put that on a space where you're growing food, because it'll either kill your plants or potentially get into your vegetables. Now, all of these you can absolutely use in your ornamental plantings, your shrubs and your perennials. But if you want it to look a little nicer, you can use shredded wood products, you know, like shredded wood bark for a more attractive mulch. It doesn't matter whether it's dyed black or red. That is not an issue. That's just personal preference. But keep it mulched. But when you do mulch it, don't do it too deep. 3 inches of mulch is fine. That's plenty. Don't go much higher than that, because you don't want to prevent water and air from the environment moving into the soil. You want air and water movement to happen, because too high of a mulch can actually prevent that. Also, you don't want to volcano your trees, which Landscapers do all the time. This is really not good. If you pack up mulch against your trees, your shrubs, even your little perennials, you can trap moisture and get a lot of fungal problems. So you see how this is pulled away from the it's pulled away from the stems of these two trees, which are kind of planted too close together, but they do show the point of what I was trying to make. Okay, and then, use water efficiently. There are a lot of ways to irrigate a plant. So, we're gonna talk about them, and you choose the one that works best for you in your garden. And also, something important to know is that not all plants need the same amount of water. You don't just go out on Monday and water everybody. So we'll talk about that too. Okay, so a little bit of thought about how water and plants work. So rain or irrigation, that you're watering, is added to the soil. Some of the water is taken up by the roots, remember, and they use it for their life processes, like bringing in nutrients from the minerals, or just moving carbohydrates around the plant, or doing various other things, keeping themselves rigid, evaporating so that they cool down. And then you have some water loss just by evaporation from the soil. And if you have a little mulch on top of there, that's going to slow that evaporation down. And a little bit of water is going to be lost from the leaves as they transpire to keep themselves cool. That's sort of the water soil cycle. Now, how much irrigation do you need? So as I said, don't irrigate based on a schedule. Look at what's going on in your garden, and you get a sense of when your plants need to be watered. A general rule of thumb for most of the perennials and vegetables that we grow is that if you have an inch of rain every week, that's good. If you don't have an inch of rain, irrigate your soil to the depth of about 6 inches. And this is a little rain gauge I have, and I check it every week. And after a heavy rainstorm, I just see did I get an inch, Yeah, okay, I'm good for the next 7 days. If I didn't get an inch and it's been 7 days since I had my last inch of rain, then I water. Not all plants. Some plants, like really established trees and shrubs and perennial plants, usually can go a little bit longer because they have very good, deep, extensive root systems. But I might want to look at the things that are more fragile, like my annuals that I just planted recently, or any tree or shrub or perennial that I just planted recently, my vegetables, things like that. So a rain gauge is very helpful. And then you can just actually look at your soil, inspect it, move your mulch away and check it out, see how deep, if there is any depth of moisture in the soil. And that might be the way you can decide whether or not you need to water. So good aim is really important. You don't need to water the leaves. There's really no reason, because water is taken up at the root level. Sometimes if you keep the foliage too wet, it can be a host to a lot of fungal diseases that attack plants, move around plants on water. They like wet leaves. And yes, of course, it rains and the leaves get wet, but you don't need to maximize that by putting any more water. So when you're watering, try to water the soil or the base of the plant. And also time of day. During very hot weather, like we're having right now, irrigate in the morning or in the early evening when the temperatures are a little bit cooler, so that as the water is coming out of whatever you're using, water evaporation is less, so that the water that's falling on the ground isn't evaporating before it can seep into the soil. This way you're not wasting water through evaporation. And also, you really want to avoid watering lightly. So when water from irrigation and rain comes down, it takes a little while. This little diagram shows that the dark brown is the wet soil that's getting watered by rain or irrigation, and the dry is still, still dry. So what you want is that water to go all the way down to the base of the roots of the plants. And for most plants, if you go down 6 inches, like your flowering ornamental plants, your vegetables, that's going to be okay. You need it deeper and a little bit wider for trees and shrubs. But what you want to do is water enough so that you covering your root zone, not just covering the top part of your soil. And how do you do that? Well, this is called infiltration rate. So whatever way you choose to water, make sure, first of all, that you're not watering so fast that the water is running off the soil, because that's wasting it too. So I have this hose going at the base of one of my trees here, and you can see this water is probably going to run off because it's not going into the soil fast enough. So make sure that you keep your hose down, or your whatever irrigation you have, so that the water is going into the soil and you don't have it running down the hill or running off somewhere else. You know, watering at the base of the plant. Then what you can actually do is you can, depending on how you water, dig down 6 inches. I got a little ruler here, and see, am I going down? Am I getting deep enough after I've watered for, I don't know, half of an hour or 2 hours, whatever. You can check it out. You know, I don't have to do it every time, but you can get a sense for your usual water practice to see if it's actually accurately watering and going deep enough by just digging a little hole and checking it with a ruler. Overwatering. This we really don't want to do, because that's certainly wasteful of water. That's the main reason, but there's other reasons not to overwater, because if you put too much water into the ground, it's going to push oxygen out of those soil pores. And if you keep having a soil situation where it's oxygen poor, you're going to kill your plant roots. You're going to kill the good microbes. And before you kill your plant roots, the bad microbes that really like it's called an anaerobic soil condition, a low oxygen soil condition, are going to start to attack your plant roots. It also encourages snails and slugs, which, you know, we don't really want around. And I've read that it lowers the sugar content and flavor of some vegetables if they are too wet. Okay, now let's take a look at a plant that's wilting, and how do we know whether it needs water or it doesn't need water? So if the top few inches of the soil are dry, you know, you check it out with your hand, and the plant is wilted in the morning and it's still wilted at night, that definitely needs water. If the top few inches are moist and the plant wilts during the heat of the day, but then recovers at night, that's just the plant losing water faster to keep cooler than it can take up water from the roots during the heat of the day. And that's okay. You don't want to put water on that situation. If the plant is wilted in the day and the night and the soil is moist, extra watering does not help recover the plant. That's probably means you have some kind of a root disease going on, and you may want to, if you have a bunch of the plants, dig one up and check it out, see if the roots look healthy. Contact our horticultural diagnostic lab for help if you want. So those are 3 situations. If your plants are wilting, don't immediately assume that they need water. I would give them a day and see if they perk up at night. And that's just means that they're losing water too fast in the heat of the day. So I spoke earlier about plantings that really do need more water than rather than your established. That's going to be any seeds that you put in the ground. You have to keep them moist until they germinate. And then as the young seedlings grow, you got to keep them pretty moist too for the next month or so until they really take root. Any new plant that you put in, whether it's an annual or perennial or a tree or a shrub, that first season, it has to be kept pretty moist routinely as it's developing its root system, because all of these guys have very shallow or not very extensive root system if they're come out of a pot where you just planted them from seed. And new plantings, this was a new heather that I put in, and I made a little bowl around it. So I took the soil and the mulch away, and I have a little rim around here. This way, when I water, the water sits in this little bowl. It doesn't have any chance of flowing off and going too far away from the root system, and it'll slowly seep down into that plant, those plant's roots. And I'm going to keep watering that for like a month and a half until I know that that root system is starting to expand. And sometimes you can tell when the root systems are starting to take hold because you'll see new growth coming out of the top. Not so much with this plant. This grows very slowly, but something like that's a little more herbaceous, especially annuals. When you start seeing the tops, flourishing, then you know that the root system has established itself. And whenever you're going to plant a perennial, one that comes back year after year, spring and the fall are a great time because the temperatures are lower and the rain is more prevalent at those times, except for actually this year, we have a lot of rain. Like right now, it's a tougher time to plant new plantings because it is so hot. However, perennials are on sale 50% off right now. So if you do want to plant a perennial now, just again, make sure that you situate it in good soil that's high in organic matter. Maybe make a little bowl around it like I did with this one and keep it watered, moist through to frost, and then it'll do well. Your vegetable garden setup. People do like to plant in rows, as in this picture on the right. That's fine. The only trouble with row planting is that water runs off into these rows, pathways, the pathways of the rows, and you kind of lose that water. If you do more of a wide row planting or a block planting, see here they have like 3 lines of lettuce, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 lines of lettuce rather than just a single line of lettuce. You don't lose as much water to the pathways. You're concentrating more of the water where the plants are that you want to grow. And when you group plants closely together, they shade out the soil. It keeps weeds out, and it also keeps the soil moister. That's a little vegetable garden thought. Now let's look at ways that you can irrigate. Drip irrigation is a system where there's a main feeder hose that comes from your tap. And then there's these little lines that come out that have little emitters every 12, 18, 24 inches that they come off. They don't, sometimes there's like a little tiny hose coming off. Sometimes it's just a hole every 18 to 24 inches. And that will deposit water, along that length. And then you can position your plants near those emitters. And it works really well. It keeps the foliage dry, brings the water right to where the plants are. It's a very efficient way of watering. The downside is that it's expensive, and you do have to know how to set it up correctly. And you have to take it down for the winter because you don't want to leave the water in there and let it freeze and the hoses break. It's not a big problem. It's a really great way to irrigate, but it's not the simplest way. This is actually what I use in my gardens, is soaker hoses. These are efficient too. These are porous hoses that seep water into the soil. You can see in this first one, the little bits of water drop seeping out. They don't come out very fast. It doesn't spray up into the air, it just seeps out, and you can see the soil around the hose starting to get wet. Here's with plants in place, you again I usually do them in an S shape like that. Usually plant the plants in between, the hoses so that they get watered. They're pretty easy to adjust these around plants, and the whole length of it emits the water. And you do need to replace these every couple of years because they kind of break down. The irrigation, these guys are much more durable. These guys, these break down about every 3 years, and you probably have to get new ones. You can take them up and fold and wrap them up and put them in your cellar or garage, but doing that sometimes is a little rough on them and they tend to break. I tend to leave them out in the garden and then figure every 3 years I'm going to replace them. They do come with these little plates inside them that minimizes the flow. This is in the inlet from your house source. Don't take these out. I used to take these out because I thought, well, I need more water than that. I need these things to water faster. Yeah, and then what happens is you weaken the joints between the inlet and where the hose connects, and you blow out your hoses. So you just have to be a little patient. Something like this may take a couple of hours to water, but it's okay because it's seeping out slowly and it's not spraying all over the place and it's getting to your plants. Overhead sprinklers are not very water efficient. You just may have a situation where you have to use this for whatever reason, but just know that try not to water if you can on windy or really hot days, because that a lot of that water is going to evaporate or blow away. The foliage does get wet, which we do try to avoid. If you have to, try to water early so the foliage is dry before night. That's when a lot of the fungal spores kind of float around and land on nice wet leaves and take hold. And then there's always hand watering. This is a terrific way because you can water exactly where you need to water it, but you do want to aim the water at the soil and not the foliage. The toughest part about hand watering is it requires patience to water slowly and deeply, especially with the watering cans, but it's doable. You just have to know, I may need 5 watering cans to get this hosta completely hydrated, or I may have to stand here aiming my watering hose at this, area of my garden for like 25 minutes, half an hour. You have to, and the way you figure this out is by, timing yourself and timing the number of buckets that you do and digging down into your soil and seeing how deep that watering is going. Now, one thing, if you, any type of these irrigation methods that are connected to your house, your own drinking water supply, you should put on what's called a vacuum breaker or a backflow valve. This is a diagram, we're not going to get into the engineering of it. Basically, when you shut off your water, you can create, there's still water in your hose. You can cause a vacuum situation to happen. And some of the water from your hose, which can, especially with a soaker hose, can be in contact with the soil, even with drip irrigation, back up into your water supply. And you don't want to bring in bacteria, soil, junk into your water supply. These are very inexpensive. Just get one of these guys and just stick it in between your water source of your house and your hose to protect your home water supply. Now, container gardens are another part of our gardening life, and they should be thought about too. They're going to need more frequent irrigation because they're smaller amounts of soil. So they're going to, be used up by the plants faster and they're going to evaporate. So you want to use a soil that has a high organic matter. If you happen to buy soil for containers, which they have now, it tends to be very lightweight and it tends to keep water in. Sometimes they even have these polymer gels that help hold on to moisture. It's another way you can go if you're interested. You can mulch container gardens. These are container gardens we have at Cornell. You can put mulch on top if you want. These are so heavily planted, as you can see, that they almost mulch themselves, so it's not a problem. You can put drip irrigation systems in there. I know people that do that who are very serious about growing vegetables, which you can certainly do in container gardens, and you can run irrigation hoses with emitters into one each of the container gardens. And even your little plants that you have outside, these are container gardens too. These are going to be needed to be watered a lot. This is actually at my house. These are all clay pots. They evaporate, they lose water very rapidly. So what I try to do for these guys is I try to use what I call gently used water. So if I'm going to make another pot of tea, because I'm a tea drinker and I've got, used water in my teapot, I just walk out and I pour that water into the plants. If I'm washing out some lettuce from the garden, this water here, I put those in my container gardens. Of course I use a hose or a watering can to water them occasionally, but whenever I can, I try to collect any what I call gently used water, water that's just washed vegetables or been part of my tea. And I put that in my containers, and it's another way to save water. So in summary, what we talked about is the various components of soil, those mineral particles from broken down rock, water, air, and organic matter, the 4 parts of what we call soil, and they're all critical to the life processes of plants. We talked about how to optimize water holding capacity by having good soil structure, those soil aggregates that have the big pores and the little pores. And we get good soil structure by adding organic matter, correct mulching, not too deep, about 3 inches and not close up against the crown or the stem of the plant, And we reduce soil compaction by not standing on our wet soil, not digging in our soil too much, not parking our cars on our soil, protecting our soil from rain and sleet with mulch. And then efficient use of water, which is aided by watering based on an individual plant's requirement. If it's an established shrub that's, going to live through a lot of drought, you don't need to keep watering it. But if it's a newly planted perennial or seeds, those you have to water more frequently. Use the best irrigation method, whether it's drip irrigation or soaker hoses or hand watering or overhead sprinkler is probably not the best one for water use. That's going to work for your garden. And water deeply. Get it down to like 6 inches for most of those vegetables and perennials, a little and deeper for trees and shrubs, instead of watering frequently and shallow. Okay, now that's it. Do we have any questions?
Donna, thank you so much for that presentation. And yes, it did inspire some questions.
Good.
So
Okay.
the first one is, how should blood meal and bone meal be used to enrich soil?
Okay, blood meal is blood meal. Yeah, I know. Blood meal is a nitrogen source. Now, this is talking about fertilizers. I did not cover fertilizers in this talk. I'll answer the question though. I did not cover fertilizers in this talk because I was focusing on what makes soil optimal for water holding capacity and not wasting water. What you're talking about, bone and blood meal, are fertilizers. And certainly you want to keep your soil fertile so that your plants grow well. Blood meal contains nitrogen. That's a nitrogen additive. And you can use it according to whatever directions are on the package. Usually good for plants that you want to put nitrogen in gardens that have leafy things like your lawn, vegetables like lettuces, spinaches, cabbages, things that you're going to eat the leaf of. You don't want to get too out of control with nitrogen for flowering vegetables and flowering plants, because they won't flower as well with too much nitrogen. So in that case, you can read the package of the nitrogen and see if they give you a so much per so many square feet. Definitely follow those directions. Bone meal contains phosphorus. We're kind of trying to back people off from using phosphorus in their gardens because, first off, Rockland County has a pretty high phosphorus level. We've got a lot of rocks, a lot of minerals. Phosphorus runoff, excess phosphorus put on in gardens can run off into streams and cause stagnation and algal growth. So the other thing with phosphorus is if you use it, and a lot of times people put it in with flowering plant bulbs like daffodils and tulips that they're planting in the fall. And we always used to put a little bit of phosphorus at the base of the bulb. That's actually come out of favor because, again, over phosphorus is not healthy for the water bodies in our county. And you can get raccoons and possums and skunks digging up your soil, trying to get at the bone that they smell, which is where the phosphorus is from. So I would say, unless you know that you have a phosphorus deficiency, and that would be a soil test, I wouldn't use the bone meal. Nitrogen, unfortunately, the soil tests don't usually measure nitrogen because nitrogen really fluctuates in soil over a couple of month period. Phosphorus is very stable. So with nitrogen, if you think that your plants are not thriving and the way they're not thriving seems to be because of a nitrogen deficiency, you can add nitrogen. But again, try to follow the package directions if you do that. Okay.
The next question is rotation of crops always needed?
That's a very good question. Crop rotation is really important for really, really big farms that grow like acres and acres of one crop and then another one on the side. For our home gardens, which let's say a good sized home garden is 30 feet by 30 feet. That's still not that big. So if you move your brassicas, you know, you like your cabbages and your broccolis, which get tons of bugs, from one side of that garden to the other, boy, don't you think those insects are going to find that those plants, you know, 25 feet away? Probably. So it's not as useful in a small garden. However, they still say, if you can, if you've got the space and you can do it, rotate the crops. I do it. I try not to plant my tomatoes in the same spot. I try not to plant, you know, lettuces and everything in the same spot. I do try to rotate. It will probably help a little bit, but it's not as important as if you have a major many acre farm. So don't get yourself too upset if your garden is too small to realistically rotate your crops. Okay.
Next question is, how often should you add compost?
Okay. So what I like to do is in the spring or the fall, I like to put some compost, you know, right on top of my perennial beds. I just sort of put it on. I tend to do it in the spring. And, you know, you can use compost as your mulch too. I mean, it works perfectly fine as a mulch. So at least once a year, I would do it. Yep, spring or fall. Or if you want to use it as your mulch, that's fine too.
Okay. You talked before about gently used water. Does that also apply to rinsing grains like rice, lentils, beans? Can you use that?
Sure. You know, this is there's something called gray water, which that's a whole other topic. Gray water is actually like water that comes out of your washing machine stuff. I'm not talking about anything where there was soap and maybe human hands in there or something. Yes, anything where you're taking vegetables, grains, little leftover water from boiling your pasta. If you want that water, let that water cool down. Don't put it on hot. That's all gently used water, and that's fine to put in your garden.
Okay. Can you use a water meter probe in the soil to determine how far the water is soaking or penetrating?
You know, I personally have never used that, but I would say, yeah, if you can use that water meter, if you know how long you've watered for and at what rate, and then you check the water meter and see, you know, how much water you've got there. And then you wait a couple of days and you haven't had any rain or anything, and you look at the water meter and you see if you've got a decrease. And if you notice that, you know, you dig down a couple of inches, oh yeah, the soil really is dry. It has definitely lost water. And maybe you can definitely tell, if you know your plants, they sort of start to wilt a little bit. I mean, not as bad as the picture I had out there, but they sort of look a little bit droopy. And yeah, water meter can definitely be part of your system of how you figure out if you don't get an inch of rain a week, whether your plants do need water.
So speaking of transplanting a shrub, how forcefully should you compact the soil?
Oh, yeah, you know, that's a really good question because so we used to dig out a hole. By the way, when you do transplant, dig the hole just as deep as the plant was in the pot, or if you're moving it from another location, just as deep as the root system was. You don't have to go really deep, but make it a little bit wider so that the roots can expand out. The other thing is we don't use outside soil or bagged soil in the hole. Use the same soil that you dug out of that hole to put back in, unless they used to say to amend the soil, like put a lot of compost in there or a lot of fertilizer in there, and they're saying no, just if you're putting it in a garden or a place in your yard where the soil is reasonably good, just use that same soil. All right, then you're going to put it back in, and of course it's a lot fluffier and there's more air in it. Rather than pack it down, which we used to do, after you put the soil in and you fill the hole back up, that's when I water with like a hose or a watering can, and that water will settle the soil and push out the excess air rather than physically pounding it down. Okay. You don't want to compact soil any more than you've already done when you've dug the hole and messed up the soil a little bit.
And then finally, what is the best time of the day to water an established lawn?
Oh, see, now that would have been Frank Rossi's talk. And I'm trying to think, if I don't give the right answer, I'm going to say it's the same thing in the morning. So that by the end of the day, you don't have water on the grass and you don't get fungal diseases on the grass. If you water early in the morning before the sun comes up, you also don't lose, or not before the sun comes up, before the sun gets really hot, you don't lose water due to evaporation. Now, should you water in the evening? I don't know. I mean, I did find that they say, you know, water later in the day, early evening, and hopefully it'll evaporate off of your soil for your regular plants. But for a lawn, that's going to all be wet, you know, regardless of what you do. It's really hard not to get the leaves of the lawn wet. So my answer is, I'm not absolutely sure, but I'm going to say it's early in the morning to water. And if you want to back that up and check it out, you can call our horticultural diagnostic lab, or if you're not in Rockland County, call your cooperative extension and ask that question. I'm not a lawn expert.
And then our last question is, please comment on using urine as a nitrogen fertilizer.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that. Urea, I think you mean, or do you mean actually?
I'm not sure.
It says urea. I don't know. I don't know whether you mean like fresh urine that someone who has drunk a lot of water is going to produce, or urea, which is a source of nitrogen. If it's urea and it's bagged, and they have a direction on it that tells you how much per, you know, square foot to use, then that seems perfectly fine. If you're talking about going out and peeing in your yard, I don't think that's a great idea at all. The latter, because you could actually kill a lot of plants that way. And if I haven't answered that correctly, please contact the horticultural diagnostic lab.
So I think that's it in terms of questions in the Q&A or chat. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask Donna before we close? Okay, I think you've answered everyone's questions, at least for now, Donna. So I want to thank you for taking a complex topic and breaking it down for us lay people, and for making it specific to Rockland, and also for plugging our Hort Lab.
We're great. You absolutely have to use, that's what it's there for. A lot of good information. Thanks everybody for joining, and happy gardening.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us at our next presentation. We'll send you an email, don't worry, and have a good evening all.